50 years ago, Berkeley, California was famous for its free speech activism. Today, it is a very different place. This week, Berkeley's City Council unanimously declared to be the world in, quote, a climate emergency. To fix that emergency, Berkeley called for a push to halt all carbon emissions worldwide and said governments must make efforts to, quote, humanely stabilize population, a phrase Robespierre would surely love. Anna Shea Hossein is a writer and political commentator, and she joins us tonight. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, Tucker.
I'm a pretty literal person. They say it's a climate emergency. Sounds right to me. So if it's an actual emergency, why does anyone in Berkeley have an air conditioner or a car? I mean, if they really believe that, no, it's sincere. I mean, I hate to sort of ask that people live out their purported beliefs, but if they're telling the rest of us we need to have fewer kids, why are they still driving and using AC, honestly?
You know, I totally agree with you, Tucker, but I also don't think they're just telling us to have less babies. I mean, climate change and the impact that human beings have on environment is related to a lot of stuff, not just the amount of children that we're having. It's about carbon emissions. It's about eating less meat. So I think we can all agree that we care about our planet, but it's not just about having less children.
Oh, no, and I don't think it is. And by the way, let me just say for the record, the whole idea is totally no, I think the idea is insane and grotesque, and it's a window into what this really is, which is social control.
But is that what Berkeley is saying?
They would even mention how.
Is that what they're saying?
What they're saying
not
is it's an emergency.
It's an emergency. Everybody stop having babies. But it is. Is it not an emergency?
Okay, but hold on. If they are saying it's an emergency, presumably they believe it is. So how can they justify riding buses, having cars, refrigerators, any activity that adds to the sum total of CO2 emissions?
Exactly.
Why are they still committing these activities? No, I'm serious. Why should I listen and take anyone seriously who is driving a car and simultaneously telling me not to have more kids?
Well, I don't think they're saying that. It's a combination of factors. And the climate is really complex, Tucker, right? It's not just one thing. You need to stop having babies. I need to stop riding my car. I think in general, the younger generation, the millennials, are becoming more environmentally cautious. We have more ride-sharing apps. I mean, I think the technology is catching up to the fact that people are becoming more conscious.
Young people are much poorer because they are deeply in student loan debt for degrees that mean nothing because they have bought into a system that is essentially fraudulent. And they have no money. Actually, that's just up there. Environmentally consciousness.
They are. The millennials are. Okay, that's also one part of it. There's more than one factor, Tucker, when it comes to climate change and what we can do to reduce our impact on it.
Look, I actually am in favor of a clean environment. So I wonder why, have you noticed this, that places that spend the most energy telling the rest of us that the world is ending because of climate change also tend to have the dirtiest streets and the largest number of people relieving themselves on the sidewalk and the most trash? Why not, if you really care about the environment, maybe you could clean up the sidewalk in front of City Hall. Does that ever occur to liberals, I wonder?
You know what? Not just liberals. It's not liberals that are responsible for climate change. It's all of us. And I agree with you. We can't just talk the talk. We have to, you know, also follow up with actions. And,
but wait, why? No, but seriously, if you care about the environment and making the world cleaner, and by the way, sincerely, I am for that. Can we all
agree that we agree with that? We all want to keep the environment cleaner and save our planet.
Yeah, but have you been to Berkeley recently? Have you been to New York City? Have you been to San Francisco? There are people with their trousers down, relieving themselves on the sidewalk, and then
Tucker,
walking around them are environmentalists on their way to lecture me about how many kids I have.
Yeah, but you know what? It's not necessarily about where in the world is more populated. It's about who is using more resources. And I completely agree with you. We all have to do much better.
I think we're sort of talking past each other. Can you agree that if we're going to make the world cleaner, we can start by cleaning up the sidewalks, and then maybe we can get to the part about fixing the hole in the ozone layer?
Yes and no. I don't think it has to be either or. It's every day.
Then why is it? Why are the cities with the most open and aggressive commitment to the environment the dirtiest? Why is Portland, Oregon a filthy place downtown?
That's not necessarily
when everybody in Portland is an environment. Have you been to Portland, Oregon recently?
I'm not talking specifically about Portland, but not all cities that are saying that we need to do better about our environment are filthy. Where are you getting that stat from?
Okay. but just track with me really quick, just for this one question. If you say you care about the environment, do you agree or disagree that maybe you should start by cleaning up the street in front of your house?
It's not. Why can't you do both? Do both.
I'm not saying you can't do both, but why is it that the people lecturing me about the environment live in environments that are filthy?
We all care about the planet. Okay. We can all do more.
Right. No, we don't all care about the planet. I care about the planet. That's why my house has nobody sleeping on the front step, because I care about the environment.
Okay, what kind of car do you drive? Okay.
I don't have a car. That's how committed I am.
Oh, really?
Anushay, great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Part of what's unique about climate change, though, is the nature of some of the opposition to action. It's pretty rare that you'll encounter somebody who says the problem you're trying to solve simply doesn't exist. When President Kennedy set us on a course for the moon, there were a number of people who made a serious case that it wouldn't be worth it. It was going to be too expensive, it was going to be too hard, it would take too long. But nobody ignored the science. I don't remember anybody saying that the moon wasn't there or that it was made of cheese. Today's Congress, though, is full of folks who stubbornly and automatically reject the scientific evidence about climate change. They will tell you it is a hoax or a fad. One member of Congress actually says the world is cooling. There was one member of Congress who mentioned a theory involving dinosaur flatulence, which I won't get into, but their view may be wrong and a fairly serious threat to everybody's future, but at least they have the brass to say what they actually think. There's some who also duck the question. They say, when they're asked about climate change, they say, hey, look, I'm not a scientist. And I'll translate that for you. What that really means is, I know that man-made climate change really is happening, but if I admit it, I'll be run out of town by a radical fringe that thinks climate science is a liberal plot, so I'm not going to admit it.
The campaign against global warming seems to have gone bust. It started as an effort to protect the environment. It is not that anymore. UC Berkeley visiting scholar Stephen Hayward just wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal detailing how the movement has been hijacked by obsessions with race and gender. Worries about carbon and rising sea levels have turned into speeches about fighting misogyny and so-called climate justice, whatever that is. Stephen Hayward joins us tonight to explain. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you, Tucker. Isn't it amazing how everything seems to get reduced to race and justice these days?
Well, yeah, but it's especially amazing when topics that have no conceivable connection to race and gender get pulled in. How did that happen?
Well, I mean, the whole point of the article was fairly simple. Most issues go through these long wave cycles. There's lots of early interest. The press gets onto it. Flurry of political activity. Some policies are made. Then we start having consideration of trade-offs. And that's been going on with global warming for several years now. It's really expensive to do what a lot of the climatistas, as I call them, want us to do. And so now that you're seeing more and more expressions, including in the Paris Climate Accord, that we need to consider gender equality and climate justice, that's a sign that the issue has, as the cliche goes, jumped the shark. And no, it's kind of at the end of its string. And public opinion surveys here and in Europe show declining public interest in the whole darn thing.
Well, it's a boutique issue for rich people, obviously, but it's also a little confusing. I mean, even if you think that climate justice is real, or even if you can explain what it is, I've never met anyone who can, or if you think that gender equality is an important part of this, what does that have to do with science? That's not science, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, and that was one of the things I said in the article is look, I'm not questioning any of what is called the consensus about climate science.
Right.
I'm just saying as a political and policy matter, this has run its course. And my goodness, you ought to see my Twitter feed blow up yesterday and today. Apparently, it's not enough to call someone a climate denier anymore when you dissent from climate orthodoxy. I'm getting called a white male supremacist, which is a really a good sign that you've run out of arguments about the issue itself.
Well, yeah, I mean, that doesn't even approach being an argument. It's a primal scream. You're at Berkeley. How were you allowed to say this at Berkeley? What are you doing there? And good for you for being there, by the way.
Well, yeah, I'm like that Civil War era general who said I'd like to fight surrounded. I think that might have been General Custer, though. I'm not sure. Look, two things two things that you and your audience should know and maybe be encouraged by a little bit. One is that we ought to make a distinction in all our universities these days between old-fashioned liberals who've dominated universities for decades. That's not a new story.
Right.
But increasingly, the universities are being dominated by a much more radical, progressive left that, as we know, often turn to violence to get their way. And a lot of the old-fashioned liberals understand that this is a crisis for the universities. And a lot of them are starting to say, and this is, here I think you want to give props to the administration and many academics at Berkeley who said, we have a problem and we need to have some more conservative voices on our faculty and on our campus. And so they reached out to me a couple years ago and invited me to come, and I'm glad to be there. I'm having a great time. And I get along with most of the liberals on the campus just fine, and the radicals won't engage me at all.
Well, I think that's important to make the distinction. I mean, if liberalism is a concern for civil liberties, a commitment to free speech, a belief in actual diversity, then I'm a liberal and proud to be one. But there aren't many left. I'm glad you found some in Berkeley. That's really heartening. Professor, thank you. It was a great piece.